Everybody, and welcome to tonight's Ridgeview and the Wine Society virtual event. My name's Emma. I'm one of the Tastings and Events Coordinator, and I'm joined here tonight by my colleagues Anna, who will be doing the tech behind the scenes, and Catherine, who will be tonight's question master. So I've just got a few points of housekeeping to cover. You'll all be on mute for the call in order to have no background noise. If you're on a phone, swipe right for speaker view. If you want to use the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen for your questions, we'll ask Brandon as many of the questions as we possibly can. And please, if you'd like, use the chat to tell us where you are and what you're drinking this evening. If you want to concentrate and you want to disable the chat function on the phone, click the three dots next to the chat and then the bell button, and then click on disabled notifications. There might be an opportunity for you to ask your questions direct to Brandon later. So if you can, we'll call your name and ask you to speak and we'll unmute you. So now let me pass you over to Matthew Horsley, who used to be one of us in the tastings team, but he's accepted and moved into buying. And he's now the buyer for English wine, amongst other things. So welcome, Matthew. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for today's Ridgeview workshop with myself and Brandon. Before I introduce Brandon, I just want to give a massive thank you to the tastings team. They're doing an amazing job putting together a pretty awesome calendar of Zoom events and Instagram tastings, etc., during this pretty difficult time. So well done. I think if there's any positive thing to come out of this situation, it's that there is so much amazing content online that's wine related. Just absorb it, lap it up and enjoy it. And hopefully you will enjoy tonight's tasting. Of course, thank you, Brandon, for joining us tonight and agreeing to do this tasting. We've been working with Ridgeview, I believe now, Brandon's probably going to disprove this in just a minute, but I think our first vintage that we purchased was 2001, so that's nearly 20 years. And Ridgeview are not only one of the best producers of English sparkling wine, but they are also, without doubt, one of our most important suppliers. And so it's really important that we get them up to showcase their amazing wines, albeit virtually via Zoom. And of course, amazing relationships require something that we do together. And in this instance, it was certainly our exhibition English sparkling wine, which I have a bottle of here. And I believe Brandon has a bottle as well, which we will be tasting a little bit later. I believe our first vintage of our exhibition wine with Ridgeview was in 2013. It was a vintage wine back then. It is now non-vintage, but we will go back in. We'll go into that in a little bit. But before I say too much and steal too much of Brandon's thunder, I'm going to pass over to him, and he's going to talk through the history of Ridgeview, a few of the wines, and then we're going to do a short tasting. And as Emma said, if you've got any questions, please just let us know. Just type them in the chat. And again, let us know what you're drinking. If it's something Ridgeview, brilliant. Hopefully it's something English. And yeah, I'm going to pass over to Brandon now, and you can take it away. Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, everyone, for joining in this evening. It's a great pleasure. This is actually my first virtual tasting since lockdown. So what better partner than the Wine Society to do that with? As Matthew said, tonight's going to be hopefully a bit fun, informal, and just a casual bit of tasting. We're going to cover the sort of broader English wine scene. We're going to talk about sort of how the scene started off and kind of the developments throughout. And then we're going to talk about kind of Ridgeview's place within that. And then we're going to move on to a little tasting. We've got our English exhibition, English sparkling wine made by Ridgeview. Hopefully you've got a bottle, if not, something English at home. And then we'll talk and loosely sort of cover the rest of the Ridgeview range. So if you haven't got a bottle of the English exhibition, then you might have one of our others from our Ridgeview range. But yeah, as Matthew said, ask as many questions as possible. Hopefully there'll be some pretty horrible questions for me to answer. But yeah, enjoy, sit back and enjoy. I've also got a little slides that I'm going to put up in a second. And yeah, let's go for it.
Absolutely, rock on.
Cool. let's have a look. See if I can share my screen here.
Lots of English wine in the chat, which is great to see. Some Ridgeview as well, Blanc de Noir 2016, which is brilliant.
Good job.
Yeah, great stuff.
Cool, right, let's get this up. Cool, can everyone see, can you see my screen? So this should be Wine GB on the screen in front of you.
Yep, we can see that now.
All good, perfect. Cool, so before we dive into all things Ridgeview, I just wanted to introduce the sort of broader industry for those of you that aren't as familiar, talk a little bit about how it started off and kind of where we are today. So English wine in the grand scheme of things, as I'm sure all of you know, is a pretty recent development. So the industry kind of as it's known as today is only really 30 years old. We make a lot of sparkling wine in the country, which we're going to come on to talking about in the following slide. But the main thing is we've achieved some really decent and great accomplishments in the short space of time that we've been making wine in the UK. So it kind of started in the modern industry in the 50s, and then sort of more recently than that, the sparkling scene as early as the late 80s and early 90s, as we're going to come on to talk about. And really 30 years history of making these sort of international award-winning wines. So this is a bit of an overview at the moment, and this is stolen from our good friends at Wine GB. Just as a bit of an overview of the English wine scene. So as you can see on the left-hand side, the number of commercial vineyards that exist in the UK now is pretty decent. So we're up to about 658, with the number of wineries around about 164 producing wine. So there's quite a lot of growing that happens in the UK. And again, I'll come on to that side of things in a minute. But that number has grown and grown and grown over the years. The annual production, you can see, has gone up pretty significantly in recent years, in particular the big boom in 2018, which was our sort of record-breaking harvest in terms of quality and quantity, which is definitely a vintage to look out for. And just some other stats there on sort of producing regions. So you can see down here, down in the right-hand corner, that most of the growth is in the southeast. Increasingly some interesting areas up in East Anglia and Suffolk. We're working with some grower vineyards down there, or up there, should I say, that are doing some really cool stuff. And then the southwest and Wales as well. Number of hectares has grown significantly, and the predominant focus at the moment is Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, accounting for a decent percentage of the hectares under vine. So the most planted being Pinot Noir. This is just to give you an overview of the split in terms of sparkling or sort of wine styles. So sparkling production accounts for roughly 70%, 69%. Still wine has increased in recent years, and there's a big focus of that moving forward, but sparkling is still holding that spot at the top there. So that's a sort of loose, a broad overview of the English wine scene. As I said, we've achieved some really decent accomplishments in the short space of time that we've been making wine in the UK. Moving on to Ridgeview. So our journey started in the English wine industry back in 1995. Ridgeview was founded by the Roberts family. So the lovely lady at the back, Chris, and her husband, Mike, so Christine and Mike Roberts, founded Ridgeview back in 1995. Their sort of journey started off the back of their previous business that they grew and crafted from nothing, from scratch. They lived in Burgess Hill. They had a very successful IT business. They grew it to a pretty significant size, and were very fortunate. They decided, as they were sort of approaching their kind of semi-retirement age, to cash that in. They were approached by an investor. They cashed that in. That gave them the capital necessary to start Ridgeview. So they started investigating. They started looking around, getting intel on what can work, what can grow in the UK, and their investigation pointed them towards Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. So the three sort of noble varieties that are grown over in our good friends over in Champagne. So they investigated, they found the land, they found a very good site in Ditchling, which is where we're based in East Sussex. So it's about 10 miles over the South Downs from Brighton, just a drive over the South Downs. Set up base there. So they bought a bungalow and 30-acre estate. They planted around about 10 acres, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, with a focus of crafting traditional method sparkling wine, and that's key in what we do. They didn't know when they started Ridgeview that the success would grow to what it is today. So I will talk a bit about production and sort of our growth later on, but it's been pretty chunky. So that's kind of where it all started off. So Mike, wife Christine, 1995, started Ridgeview, Ditchling in East Sussex. Now, sadly, Mike passed away in 2010, which this photo is quite recent, which is why he's not in the photo. But Mike was a massive character in the wine scene. He actually received an MBE from the Queen for his services towards the English wine industry. And those that knew Mike, who started the journey of the Wine Society, knew that he was, you know, a cheeky chappy, very cool guy, and sadly missed. But the faces in the photo represents the Roberts family today in 2020. So as I said, Chris at the back started Ridgeview. They're standing there in her lovely garden, with the vines behind, which we'll come on to in a second. Also in the photo, the lady on the left, you've got Tamara. So Tamara is Mike and Chris's daughter. Tamara's brother on the right-hand side over here, Simon. Simon is our head winemaker. Tamara is our CEO. We've also got Mardi in the middle, who I believe is tuned in right now. Mardi is our marketing director and has been there for coming up to 20 years, or 20 years exactly. And then we've got another Simon, which becomes a little bit confusing. So Simon Larder, who is married to Tamara, who looks after sort of all of our technical and facility side of things in the business. So you've got kind of the 4 key active family members at the helm of what we do in this day and age. We've also got a couple of boys who are becoming of age. So they're sort of 13, 14, 15 now. They're sort of starting to push me around, give me a few orders, which is quite fun. No, they're awesome. They've actually been helping out in the sort of kitchen. We've been doing some pop-up dinners with local chefs. We actually did one with the Wine Society. We got one of our local chefs in, Matt Gillen, who's a great friend of the family and us. And we did a sort of 5-course paired tasting menu. And the boys actually got stuck in the kitchen and helped out, which was great fun. So that is the family, and everything we do is about the family, and it's about quality English traditional method sparkling wine. So the 2 sort of second generation as such, Tamara, as I said, our CEO, Tamara joined the business back in 2004. Tamara is actually a chartered accountant by trade, but she decided to join the family business back in 2004. She joined as the general manager back then, and now is our chief executive. And her brother Simon, head winemaker, has been at Ridgeview pretty much since the start. He helped Mike, the founder, his father, plant the vines back in 1995 in Ditchling, and is responsible now for crafting all of our beautiful English sparkling wines. Simon went off for a little while. He went off, I think he did a couple of vintages over in Australia, where he worked for Brown Brothers, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. Simon met Mardi, that's where he met Mardi, so Mardi is Aussie. And they came back together, got married, and yeah, we've been there ever since. Cool. This is where we're based. So this is our vineyard, this is our Chardonnay, our oldest vines that we have. So this is some 25-year-old Chardonnay vines, which actually are some of the oldest Chardonnay vines in England now. You can see the beautiful South Downs in the background. Over the South Downs, you've got Brighton, just to show you the sort of picturesque landscape that we have in the UK and suitable for viticulture. So originally, when we started out, we planted our vines here. We started with something like 20,000 bottles, annual production from two vineyards. So we have this one here. And to the right of this vineyard, we have another little plot of land, which is where we grow our Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. which roughly represents about 10 acres. And these days we're actually sourcing fruit from a total of about 100 acres. So across the South Downs National Park, we work very closely with our partner growers across Sussex, Kent, East Anglia, as I said earlier. And we have very close partnerships in place with those grower vineyards, where we source fruit at the end of the season, and we work very closely with them. So Matt, our vineyard manager, who has been with us for 17, 18 years, dots around to all of these different sites and liaises very closely with them on the viticultural practices that they're carrying out. So we have a nice sort of geographical spread, and all of those different parcels bring a different sort of taste profile that we use for our blending, which we're going to come on to talk about later on. But this is our hub, this is where we're based, this is where the winery is. And so we started off first year, something like 20,000 bottles. And then today, I think last year, 2019, we bottled roughly 400,000. So the growth has been very significant indeed. And demand continues to outstrip supply, which is a great position to be in. So I thought the next slide here, I'll just show us sort of a picture of where we're at the moment in the season. So these are vines that have just started the season about 4 weeks ago. We went through a crucial stage called bud burst. The little buds appear, which are very prone to risk of frost. So we work very closely this time of year. I mean, all throughout the year, but in particular this time of year, it's a very important time of year to protect the vines against this crucial frost that comes in. So you can see there's some very delicate area of plant tissue. During that time of year, what we do is we cover the vineyard entirely in what we call bougies, which is a French term for candles. And these bougies are essentially 5 litre, they look like 5 litre paint pots full of paraffin wax. And we cover the whole vineyard in these candles. And in nights that there's frost present, the frost comes in. Matt, bless him, who's standing there in the photo, he'll be monitoring his sort of app, and we have a series of weather stations set up across the vineyard. And as soon as the temperature falls below something like -1, all hands on deck. He goes out to the vineyard. He's got an assistant, Tom. They head out, and in about 45 minutes, they light all of these candles, which looks something like this. What we aim to achieve with that is we aim to achieve sort of hot air currents. So these little candles give off these little currents, circulating that cold air that comes in towards this microclimate, towards this delicate area of plant tissue. And it just takes the edge off enough to stop any frost damage. And if frost damage does come in, it can be pretty devastating for annual yields. So in particular, the 2017 vintage was a very bad year in the UK for frost damage. Essentially what happens is the leaves go all crispy, and it's almost like you're holding a lighter to the plant. So this is our sort of conventional method of protecting against frost, so these giant candles, and they work really, really well, and they're really effective. But what it means is a lot of sleepless nights for our vineyard team. So Matt, bless him, there was forecasted frost last night, which I think we escaped. We didn't have to light. We've got our fingers crossed for this evening, as I believe there's some forecasted frost again. So Matt will be on standby for that. So that is pretty much one of the most crucial stages in the UK English sort of viticultural scene that determines yield and has the greatest impact in reduction is frost. So every year we pray and hope for no frost. So in particular, 2018 was a good year. We had minimal frost and as a result, great yields, as well as the sort of longer summer period. This is just a picture of sort of the growing season in full swing. So I suppose the next thing after frost that really sort of kicks in is fruit set, or flowering fruit set, which is the next crucial stage to take place. Again, in the UK, as we have a lot of rainfall, there can be a lot of difficulty with reduction in fruit set because of the delicate flowering or pollination process that happens end of June, early July. So that's a really crucial stage. There isn't a lot we can do to protect during that time of year. So we just have our fingers crossed. We then go into sort of ripening, I suppose, is the sort of next crucial stage, just after the grapes change colour. Usually end of August, early September. Grapes change colour, the skins become a little bit more delicate, sensitive, a bit more elastic, and that's when the grapes really begin to ripen. And usually, depending on the weather and the conditions outside, you're looking for sort of a 4 or 5 week window for those grapes to fully ripen before they're harvested. And we're monitoring very closely the level of acidity and sugar ripeness in those grapes to determine when those grapes are going to be picked. Obviously, across each parcel of land we work with, they're harvested at different stages, which is, gives a bit of pressure relief off of the winery team with grapes coming in and that sort of thing. And then usually we're picking by hand. So these are the little picking crates that we use to harvest our fruit. We usually get a team of roughly sort of 30, 40 workers in each vineyard to help us with the picking. And what happens is we assess each individual bunch for any imperfections. The imperfections, if they can, they are removed in the vineyard, and then they're loaded into these little picking crates ready for processing in the winery and pressing. Average yields in the UK are pretty up and down. So going back to that original slide at the start, the fluctuation in volumes is pretty colossal. And those are predominantly down to the fact that frost is such a killer, wet weather, and overall sort of lack of sunshine. So it is a pretty challenging climate to grow fruit in the UK. One thing that is key about the UK is we have this extremely long growing season. So typically we're picking our fruit maybe 2-3 weeks later than they do in Champagne. And what that allows is it allows the grapes to spend this extra period of time on the vine, this extra hang time, where they develop this extra aromatic, these extra complexities. And therefore the resulting fruit itself tends to be really pure and expressive and aromatic. So the fruit concentration in the UK is very strong, and the resulting wines, you can really get that purity of fruit and that sense of sort of place and style, which we'll come on to talk about when we taste the Wine Society blend in a second. You've also got this piercing, bursting acidity in the UK because of that cool climate that we're growing fruit in, which is super clean and refreshing, which a lot of the wines in the UK represent. This is just another little vineyard shot, typical day in Ridgeview. Then we're in the winery. So this is our winery, which was built back in 1999. You can see the tanks are pretty compact in there. We've grown pretty quickly, as I said earlier. And so we've gone from making back in, I think, 2012, 90,000 bottles to 400,000 last year. And everything is made on site in Ditchling, predominantly in stainless steel. So what happens is the fruit that come in those picking baskets get loaded into a press. We press incredibly gently because we're looking for that really delicate extraction of juice and aromatics. We ferment that to full dryness to produce our base wine. Couple of processes later, that wine ends up in the bottle, which is where we go through the bottling process. That goes into our underground cellars, which if you haven't had the opportunity to visit Ridgeview already, and hopefully when all of these sort of restrictions and these times are lifted, we look forward to welcoming you to Ridgeview to come and actually see the cellar itself, which is very cool. But what happens down there is the wines are bottled. In that bottle, we've got obviously our sugar and yeast to undergo the second fermentation, and all of those bottles are hand stacked in the cellar, ready to undergo their second fermentation to get the fizz, but also to age and get that sort of critical bready yeasty note down in the cellar. And that's what the cellar sort of, to give you a rough idea of a sort of typical cavern in the Ridgeview cellar. So all hand stacked by hand. The first sort of 6 to 8 weeks, the wine is fermenting again, gaining its fizz. Once all those yeast cells die off, we leave it for a period of time, anywhere up to 10 years for some of our magnums, for that extra sort of leesy or sort of yeastier profile. And then all the wines come back up from the cellar once we're happy with the resulting style, ready to be sort of processed and finished off, which is where we sort of take out the yeast, top it up with a bit of reserve wine, put a cork in it, label up very nicely, and we're sort of ready to rock and roll, and you guys to sort of get stuck in. Cool. So I think we've sort of covered the history of English wine, a little bit about what's happening in the sort of scenes today. We've also talked obviously about the family story, Ridgeview, where we're at today. We've had some pretty decent developments in recent years. Last year we built a new winery, which has enabled us to grow and expand. The team is growing, and yeah, I think it's now time to taste a bit of wine. So hopefully you've all got a bottle or a glass of English sparkling wine. Hopefully the Wine Society exhibition. This is what I've got here. And if not, we're going to be talking about the rest of the Ridgeview range after this. But yeah, enjoy. Cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brandon. I think you can all agree, if you haven't been to Ridgeview before, you'll see from those pictures it is an absolutely gorgeous place. And so once this all blows over, I highly encourage you to go and visit, because it really is beautiful. And I've not been to see the new buildings yet, but I look forward to in the near future. So yeah, I think we're going to taste the exhibition wine now, aren't we? Would you like to tell us a little bit about it before we?
Yeah, let's do it, absolutely. So as Matthew said earlier, I believe we started this blend back in 2013. So our relationship with the Wine Society dates back 20 years. So one of our longest sort of relationships that we've had. And I think we started off selling Bloomsbury and Fitzrovia, which are two of our core wines in our signature range. And the relationship developed and developed. We had I think our buyer back then, Mark Buckingham, was very close with Mike, our founder. Mm-hmm. And they used to attend, or we used to attend, a lot of the sort of family affair member society tastings. And a couple of conversations later, we got involved with the society exhibition range, which is, you know, a real honour to be involved with. I like to say it sort of represents, you know, the benchmark of the, you know, the category or the style that they're looking to put forward. So it started in 2013, very much a joint project. So we work very closely with the Wine Society on this wine. So in due course, Matthew will be coming to join us at the winery to do the next phase of blending, which is where we get all of our base wines together, sit in a room together, and start mixing all the various different parcels together to create the style that is the Society exhibition English sparkling wine. So Simon, our head winemaker, will sit down with myself and Matthew. Previous was Freddie, and we sit down and we assess all the different base wines and work together very closely on crafting this sort of non-vintage, consistent style that's reflective of English wine and the Ridgeview style, but has this sort of Wine Society twist on it with the guys helping out there. So this wine is a very, very decent introduction to Ridgeview. This in the UK, obviously, as I said earlier, we have this extremely long growing season, which allows this real fruit concentration. This really harnesses that fruit concentration. So we're really seeing sort of concentrating fruit characteristics in this wine. The blend is focusing on 2/3 Chardonnay, 1/3 Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. So Chardonnay in the UK is pretty reliable. When we blend it, it's responsible for that really crisp acidity, sort of minerality, and those green orchard, sort of green apple notes. So really fresh, clean, fruit-forward style. The Pinot Noir contributes that sort of body and structure, and the Pinot Meunier adds that sort of aromatic charm, roundness, and sort of a little bit more structure as well, and then sort of mid-palate. So there's a blend of all three, focusing on the Chardonnay grape. And I think you'll agree, Matthew, that, you know, it really does showcase, what we can do really well in England, and that is that sort of really fresh fruit, fruit forward concentration and acidity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think not only does it really reflect English sparkling wine well with that amazing precision and lovely crisp acidity, but it also showcases its main component, which is the Chardonnay. It does have that lovely lemon curdy, zesty freshness to the nose, and again, that amazing line of acidity which goes through the wine. It's just an amazing introduction to English sparkling. It's just absolutely perfect. How about, so how long is this spending on the lees at the moment before disgorgement?
But typically the English sparkling wine spends between 12 and 18 months on the lees. The sort of main reasoning why 12 to 18 months is to focus on that prime fruit characteristic. So one of the key things, as I said, the Ridgeview style itself is really capturing that kind of long growing season and showcasing that in our wine. And so that time is the sort of the perfect opportunity really to really bring forward that fresh fruit character, but then also in the back you have those sort of easier autolytic notes coming through.
Yeah.
Between 12 and 18 months. Usually it's towards the end of its sort of NV or that batch, I suppose, you'll start seeing that sort of 18 months, in the back there. So, but this wine is, yeah, as I said, really fresh, fruit forward and clean. It all pairs incredibly well with wine. So for those of you at home, hope you've got some sort of fish and chips in front of you, or if you've got some oysters.
Definitely fish and chips. Yeah. A
bit more challenging, but some oysters is the perfect pairing. So anything that you would squeeze lemon on, that sort of fresh citrus, sharp quality, really brings out the sort of, the charm and the sort of aromatics there as well. So
I agree.
By all means, pair it. Anything quite fatty or greasy, the acidity cuts through very, very nicely.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I think it is a wine that, will develop and change over the next year, but I don't think it's necessarily one of those sparkling wines that you want to leave for too long, because the charm is in the fruit and the charm is in the fresh acidity. And so, it's why we don't put a huge drink date on it, although I know that the acidity, the core of that acidity will carry the wine for a long time. The charm is in its youth. So, yeah, but the base wine for this, you said, is predominantly what vintage?
So I think we're currently sipping is the 17 base vintage with a little bit of reserve in there as well. So we allow up to 25% reserve.
Yep.
And then when you guys come down and blend, we dictate the percentages of that to sort of fit the key style. But as a non-vintage wine, the aim is consistency. Of course. Batch. So one of the main ideas is just making sure that is, in sync year on year. And that can be quite challenging with the UK and the difficulties faced in our viticulture, in our viticulture. So,
absolutely. There are so many choices to be made as well: disgorgement dates, time on lees, dosage levels as well, which is something I'll be experiencing soon with new samples that you've sent. But thank you very much. That's absolutely delicious, that wine. I believe we're still on the 17 base vintage now. We'll be moving on to the 18 at some point later this year. So I highly recommend people snap up some of the 17 base vintage, because it's wonderful. I'm conscious that we've got quite a lot of questions to answer, and so do you want to whiz through the rest of the range very quickly, and then we can answer some questions, which I think Catherine is running. So you take it away. You go through the rest of the range very quickly, and then we'll go on to some questions.
Fantastic. So just to sort of loosely cover the Ridgeview range. So on the left-hand side under the white labels here, we've got our signature range. So this represents pretty much the best introduction to what we do and as a house style. So on the left-hand side, we've got the Bloomsbury, which is the sort of blue and green label. Chardonnay dominant. So again, very fresh, clean, fruit forward. The wine in the middle with the sort of orangey label is Cavendish, which is a little bit more traditional in its approach, focused more on the Noir and the Meunier. It's the opposite blend to Bloomsbury. So if you get the opportunity for those at home to taste Bloomsbury and Cavendish side by side, it's a very good comparison on the impact that varietal has on the blend. We've also got the Fitzrovia Rosé, which is sort of our signature rosé. It's a rosé that's Chardonnay dominant, and it's a blended rosé. So we had a small proportion of red base wine at blending to achieve this super elegant style. And that makes up the sort of core range. So if you haven't tasted it already, by all means, get involved. Then on the right-hand side, we have our limited release tier. And these are very specific styles made in tiny quantities and only in the best vintages. So at present, we are pouring the 2014 vintage, which in the UK was a good vintage. We were very happy with the 2014 vintage. The one in the middle, the Blanc de Blanc, is our single vineyard Blanc de Blanc. So this is the only wine we make from a single vineyard. So our original vines planted back in 1995, 25-year-old vines, and is the sort of freshest, cleanest style, and it's just super pure and precise. And then the Rosé de Noir on the left with the sort of purple label is a Sanier method sparkling rosé, which is quite rare to find. And it's a real winemaker's wine. So our winemaker makes it because he absolutely adores that style. We've got some interesting, exciting new batches released of that in coming years, which I can't really talk much about, but see that come up in the questions, but hopefully, it'll be one to look out for. And then the Blanc de Noir, which is currently available in the Wine Society, is one of my favourite wines. Blanc
I agree, one of my favourites as well.
Just the Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier from the 14 vintage, from the best parcels of Pinots that we source. So Simon and Matt will be eyeing up the fruit in the vineyard, and then once it's coming off the press, they'll be tasting that base juice, almost dissecting each parcel to find that right quality in the best vintages. And if it makes the cut, then Blanc de Noir is made. So super limited releases. We're typically only bottling sort of 4,000 or 5,000 bottles of these wines in the year making them, and we age them for a little bit longer in the cellar. So we're aging them for a minimum of 3 years. So they take on that extra sort of bready, brioche quality.
That's 3 years on the lees, not undercorked before release. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so yes, that's the full sort of Ridgeview range, very loosely. And I know we've got some questions, so we've sort of been a crack on with those.
Yeah, I'll just definitely doff my cap to the Blanc de Noir. I think it's an amazing style. And I think from my tastings over the last year of English Sparkle, whenever tasting a new producer, it always seems to be the Blanc de Noir that shines through at the moment for me. It just has that little extra weight and that richness, which I know a lot of people possibly want with English wine. I know it's probably not the style, but if you're looking for something that's slightly richer, slightly fuller, slightly more like champagne, a Blanc de Noir is always a good one to go for. Sorry, Catherine, you go ahead, ask us some questions. Sorry, I've been trying to keep an eye on them as I've gone. But,
don't worry,
it's difficult.
It's perfect. I've just been sitting, absorbing all the information. It's been great.
And drinking some English wine. The expression wine.
I have been drinking some English wine as well, yes. So we are going to go on to the questions. I'm going to start off with a couple that we've had a lot of members ask, and then we are going to go on to some with some actual members asking you the questions as well, Brandon.
Sure.
For everyone here, if I say your name, we'll then unmute you and I'll introduce you to speak. So don't worry, don't think, you need to do that. We are actually live on YouTube, so let's do a bit of a sort of safety thing. If we could have no swearing, no sort of anything untoward.
Davina McCall moment.
We'll come to that shortly. Yeah, exactly. So obviously the sparkling wines are amazing. They're incredible and they're really enjoyed, and it's something that Ridgeview are really sort of good at, as is evident with what they've done. But is there any plans for any still wines at all?
Not that I'm aware of. And I think one thing that the Roberts family, have been very, very sort of consistent in their message is that they want to deliver on exceeding and excelling in one area, and that's sparkling. So the focus has always lied from the start, and always, I think, will be in sparkling wine, and just aiming to create the best sparkling wine that we can. There have been some vintages where still wines can be, and there are a lot of still wines on the market that are fantastic, but the focus is in English sparkling for us at Ridgeview. I think will always be.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're suited for the location to sparkling wine very well, and so stick doing what you do best and make amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. Just keep, despite people sort of make a still wine. No, we're I think the focus will always be sparkling wine for sure.
Good. It's not broke. Why change?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've had a couple of other questions from a few members about sort of a double edge on this one. Obviously, a lot of English sparkling wines now can very much hold their own against champagnes. And there are a lot of champagne houses, sort of Taittinger and Pommery, that are buying sort of vineyard land in the south of England. Have you been approached at all for any sort of collaboration from any champagne houses, and whether you would sort of want to collaborate? And then on the other side, is there any worry that this sort of increase in traditional champagne houses having sort of a little hook in the English market and in the English sort of wine space, is that a threat at all? Do you feel worried sales wise?
I think I'm not sure if we've been approached at Ridgeview to collaborate at all. What we do very well at Ridgeview and do quite a lot of is contract winemaking. So we make a lot of wine for other vineyards that don't have their own winemaking facilities. But I don't think as such we've been approached to do any collaborations, but I know that other English producers have made wine for the champagne houses. So I know Hattingley Valley, for example, over in Hampshire, they were the producers of the Pommery English sparkling. So I think that was a vintage or two ago, the Pommery came onto the market. So I know, maybe not necessarily Ridgeview, but I know other producers have made wine on behalf of other champagne houses. And then with regards to the other question about concerns over sort of them getting involved, I think no is the answer. We're not concerned. I think it's almost a sort of even more of a sort of vote of confidence that they have faith and belief in the industry, and that they're wanting to get involved. And I think people see that as a positive message, that they are investing and they can see the future of the category. And I think it's great, that they are getting involved for sure.
Lovely. So we're going to go on to some member questions now. So we've got the first question from Alec. Alec, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, from all the way up in Aberdeenshire. So in the last couple of years, there seems to be a big shift away from effervescence to aroma with sparkling wines. So I was wondering what shape or style of glass you recommend to drink your wines out of. I think there's a couple of us drinking out of Viognier or Chardonnay glasses this evening.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and we work pretty closely with Riedel, and we've sort of put together side by side maybe 9 or 10 different tasting or champagne or sparkling wine specific Riedel glasses. And the one that's always come out on top for us is the Renal Veritas. It's the sort of on-trade specific. It looks a sort of smaller, slightly narrower version than a sort of Bordeaux glass, is the way I'd describe it. But we use those in the winery and the winemaking team and across the board. So I would say for us, it would be the Riedel sort of Veritas on-trade specific glassware.
It's almost like a cross between a standard kind of Bordeaux glass and a flute, isn't it? It's got a very kind of tulipped bowl, but much broader than a classic flute. I'd second that as well. I'm not a big fan of flutes for sparkling wine. I prefer a slightly more conventional wine glass. So I'm technically the accessories buyer as well, and I'm using a £2 glass from Tesco because I'm terrible at breaking glasses when I'm at home. So I'm using something which is a similar shape, I suppose, to the Veritas, maybe slightly kind of squatter at the bottom, but it does capture the aroma and it fits my considerable schnoz in as well, which is always important.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. No, I think there has obviously been a move away from that kind of traditional flute. For tasting to really appreciate the aroma, which is a big appreciation when you're tasting and drinking wine. So yeah, in our sort of, when we're running our tours and tastings at Ridgeview, we use the sort of tulip shaped glass, which is a little bit more, tulip in shape as opposed to the Riedel one. Work incredibly well for aroma as well, very good to drink from. And they sort of have the best of both between keeping that effervescence, but adding that aroma to it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So the next question we've got is from Adrian. Adrian, if you're ready to ask your question, you can go ahead. Oh, let's just unmute you. Yeah, you ready?
Yeah, hi Brandon. I was wondering, do you think we need some sort of marketing term for English wine other than just English sparkling wine? I know in the rest of France they use the term crémant, and I was wondering if something like that could be used for alongside Sussex, Hampshire, Kent, or as more of a sort of catchy marketing term.
It's a very good question.
Very good question. Yeah.
Very good question, and a big debate for many, many years. And I think the sticking point and the difficulty is always trying to get all producers to agree on one term, because everyone has an opinion or has an idea of what they would like to call it. And so it's always been a very, very challenging thing to kind of nail down. I don't know if there's any background work by our board, WineGB, on creating a term. I think there's probably a bit of work going on, especially with the introduction of Charmat method English, like sort of Prosecco style English, if you like, and other sort of categories outside of traditional method. But I think it would be good to have a term, but I think from our side of things and from a Ridgeview perspective, whilst there's a lot of chat around that, we're sort of focused more on actually making Ridgeview more recognisable, so that not that I don't think it would ever come to it, but say in Prosecco, there's quite a lot of producers that aren't or don't get the recognition that they have because it's more of a let's have a glass of Prosecco instead of a so I think the brand is this focus whilst that sort of happens in the background quietly. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, there's been a bit of push from a few producers. I think there's one in the Cotswolds, I think, who've coined the phrase bullari, which I think is the original Latin for bubbles, which to me just sounds awful. And so hopefully we won't go with that. But I agree. I think it would be good to nail down a term. I'm not too worried about English sparkling wine. I think that's fine. It's a good little moniker, but it would be helpful to have something that's a little bit more catchy.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But very good question.
Yeah, great question.
Thanks. So our next question is from Hannah Aldgate. Hannah, if you're ready, let's go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. I've got a couple of questions. The first one, I just wondered, it's interesting that you use bougies for the frost damage. I just wondered why you chose to use them, given that it means everyone has to get up in the middle of the night and actually light them, because it must be quite labour intensive. And the second question was just, you mentioned you pick different plots at different times, and I just wondered how you determine which plot to pick and when.
Sure. So the first question, why we use bougies, so they are the most sort of effective way to combat frost. We found there's many different frost combating techniques, if you like, that exist. So I know, almost like fans on the back of tractors, you can go and drive a tractor around a field or a vineyard to circulate air. There's also sort of like suction, sort of massive cannons that take the cold air away from the microclimate and push it up.
Yeah, it kind of blasts a circle of air kind of that way rather than around the vineyard. Yeah,
for sure. But that only works with one type of frost, and there's a couple. There's also, you can fly a helicopter around it. I don't know how that won't go down very well with the neighbours in the UK, but there's quite a few. There's also water sprinklers you can install, which essentially shoots water onto the canopy, onto the leaf, which in cold nights obviously kind of turns into a little ice block, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but essentially insulates that plant tissue enough to stop the frost burn.
The act of freezing gives off heat as well, so that
For sure.
that helps protect it.
But yeah, I think for us the most, and what we've discovered over our 25 years of growing is the most effective way is bougies. And yes, it's labor intensive, but it's part of the game. It's a real labor of love. So
I think that was sorry, you go on.
And then the second question, could you? I didn't remember that actually. Sorry.
Just picking different plots.
Oh, so yeah.
How do you know what to pick and when?
So we use a couple of devices, if you like, to measure ripeness. So one of them is a refractometer, which is essentially where you squeeze a grape onto this sight glass, and that will give you a reading of the sort of the sugar in the grape.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in the lab, we use a hydrometer and measure the density in order to determine when that fruit is ready. But we taste the grapes as well, and we measure the acidity and the sugar ripeness. And once we've hit that balance of sugar and acidity, we're ready to start picking. And usually, it doesn't exactly follow that, but we usually you would probably start in Kent, where there's a little bit more sunshine, and work our way sort of west. As a big generalization. And so that's how it works really. And so we're probably harvesting over a 4 or 5 week period. So it's all hands on deck and pretty full on in the winery.
Yeah, it's good to have vineyards in numerous different counties, so that it's convenient for picking, but also you can cover your risks slightly. So yeah, Kent is typically slightly warmer. It's called the Garden of England for a reason, and Sussex is kind of in between, and then Hampshire is typically a little bit cooler. It's also probably where most of the frost worries are in Hampshire. So yeah,
for sure.
Great question, thank you.
So the next question we've got is from Paula Carter. Paula, if you're ready.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Brandon. It's very clear from your presentation and from the visits, I've been on the tour, and it was marvellous, that you're all about attention to detail, and an important part of that is the picking, the hand picking. Given what we've heard about, and given where we are at the moment, given what we've heard about the difficulty of getting pickers, what are you planning for the harvest this season? And do you think there's going to be an issue around getting experienced pickers who can do it the right way for you?
For sure. So we usually partner with a company called Vineworks, who is where we normally get our sort of seasonal labour for. So whether that's pruning, picking, etc. And I haven't heard any news from them at present, but I'd imagine the contingency, if we couldn't get hold of our sort of normal workforce through Vineworks, would be to recruit local staff. So we would get local hands in to come and help us pick. It can be a little bit less reliable day 2 when people's backs are sort of giving in, but we would have to do that really. So we have done it in the past. Obviously we would be more than prepared to do that again, but typically the sort of work pace and obviously the expertise, like you say, is in Vineworks. So we'll see how that pans out, but essentially we would source our sort of local workforce for that.
It helps as well that you're close to Plumpton College as well. Do you
Yes.
get people from Plumpton coming to help you out?
Yeah. So we've had a fair few Plumptonites through our doors over the years. So I am a Plumptonite, so I went to Plumpton, and to be honest, most of the winery team and the rest of the business. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we do encourage the students of Plumpton to come and get on board for sure.
Definitely. But hand harvesting with sparkling wine grapes is essential. It has to be done with absolute care. Any form of oxidation from broken berries before it gets to the winery is not good. So essential that it's handpicked.
Absolutely.
Great question. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
So I think we're coming up to maybe the last question, and this is one that we've had from a few members as well. So I'm going to do it as a broad question. Cool. But it's the effect of climate change and the effect that's having at Ridgeview or in English wine in general, whether it's something that actually us warming up a little bit is beneficial for a ripening potential, or whether it's sort of more of a worry as well. So
Great question. Brandon, do you want to take it from a Ridgeview point and then I can go a bit more broad?
Yeah, let's do that. So I would say over the 30 years that we've sort of been making this, the sort of sparkling in the UK, we definitely have seen a shift in the climate. So back when we started out, we were very much on the cusp with being able to achieve the sort of minimum legal, if you like, ripeness levels to produce English quality sparkling wine. And that has changed, and there has been a gradual increase in temperature over that time. I know there's areas of Europe that are, definitely struggling with, strict legislation in place with certain grape varieties that they're actually witnessing a lot of over-ripeness issues. And in Champagne as well, 30 years ago, there wasn't a need to chapterize, there wasn't a need to add the additional sugar to get extra alcohol. So we've certainly seen a shift, and I think it has been beneficial in the sense that we're getting probably a little bit more yield, maybe a little bit more ripeness in the fruit. So the aromatics are a little bit greater. So I think it has been beneficial for the industry, for English viticulture. And that, it's one of the reasons why the English or the champagne houses are investing in the UK, is because of that additional 2-3 week window that we have to grow our fruit. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to stress that climate change, certainly in the UK and across Europe, doesn't just mean increasing temperatures. When it comes to viticulture, it's not all, sunshines and let's ripen grapes easily. It's, you're bringing bud burst earlier, which increases the threat of frost damage. It's flooding. It's changes of temperature, which are unprecedented, and so there's lots of worries, which aren't just happy rising in temperatures. There's so many different issues going on, and so I think there was a survey done not that long ago about whether English wineries thought that climate change was a good thing or a bad thing, and actually the majority said it was a bad thing, because there were so many unknowns coming from freak weather patterns which were causing lots of damage. And I think one of the most important things, certainly for English wineries, is yield. It's getting enough wine, enough grapes to produce enough wine. And certainly frost and other freak weather patterns caused by climate change can really hinder that. But on the whole, the UK does seem to be warming, and we are being able to ripen grapes typically a bit more consistently. And certainly from my tastings of still wines over the last couple of years, the wines do seem to be becoming more consistent, which is good. The grapes typically are riper, the wines are a bit richer, a bit more expressive, which is good. But yeah, climate change isn't just roses and good stuff. So yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
So I think that just about wraps us up. I think Emma is ready to do the close off, but thank you very much both for answering those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. That was brilliant, really interesting.
An absolute pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thank you actually to both of you, to Matthew and Brandon, for joining us this evening. It's been a really lovely chat, helped obviously by a little glass of Ridgeview as well. So thank you very much. We hope that all the rest of you have enjoyed it, and that that it's actually just been very informative. So the video will be going live on YouTube, and we'll email you the link tomorrow and give you all the details. And next week, so I know a few of you are saying you're actually really starting to look forward to these weekly Zoom meetings or Zoom webinars. Next week's a bit of a bumper week. So we've got Christina Weiss from Austria. We've got Marcel, who's going to be talking about Riesling, and we've got Séverine Slumberger from Domaine Slumberger in Alsace as well, who I think is going to be majoring on Pinot Gris. So it should be a really good week. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you soon, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.